Chapter 4 Surges. It had been another week since Little Wing had been introduced to her elder sister, putting the filly at a little over 2 weeks of age as far as any pony knew. The rest of her previous meeting with Rainbow Dash had been unproductive. That is to say, the other siblings had little to no contact at all. Scootaloo, however, had been barely able to tear herself away from the little foal. However enamored she might have been, though, Little Wing found it a very uncomfortable experience, compounded by Rainbow Dash's aloof attitude. It hadn't exactly been the filly's favorite day. Since then, Bo Hothoof had finally finished work on her new room and moved the cot into there. The walls were painted the exact same color as her coat, the cot sitting in one corner next to the doorway with various chests and toys scattered along the edges of the room. One firmly locked window sat on the opposite wall of the doorway, and various rainbows had also been lovingly painted along the walls amidst clouds of various shapes and sizes. It was here where Little Wing had just awoken from a midday nap, looking around the room as she regained her awakening senses. The sun was shining through the window, bathing the room in its soft glow. Little Wing placed her hooves firmly beneath her and lifted herself up, taking a few experimental steps before emitting a squeaky yawn. She was finally getting used to walking on all fours, it seemed, a fact that had apparently warranted her parents to provide her with a ribbon that was now pinned to the side of the crib. Number 1 walker. It had been odd, but she'd been quite giddy at her parents fawning over her, having never experienced such a family dynamic before. Still, for all her newfound walking skills, it helped very little when it came to escaping her current prison. "Blah!" Little Wing shouted out, as was customary when needing to leave the confines of her crib. Little Wing listened for a moment, expecting to hear voices or the sounds of hooves on the floor getting closer to her room. Nothing, however, reached her ears. Little Wing huffed, apparently having not been heard. Her parents must have been in the kitchen, or Bo Hothoof might have been working in the garden. "Bah!" she shouted again, making sure the volume of her voice had been heightened. Still nothing. Little Wing started to feel uneasy. She didn't like the thought of being stuck behind those taunting wooden bars for hours on end with nothing to do. What if she starved to death and no pony was there to notice? Rather unlikely, but the thought had crossed the foal's mind nevertheless. Little Wing took in a deep breath, her cheeks puffing up from the effort as she held the breath in. Her wings splayed out as she unleashed the loudest shout she could possibly muster, and she gave those wings a forceful flap as if it would better project the sound waves of her vocal cords. Blah! And, just like that, she found herself spiraling out of the crib. Little Wing stayed perfectly still with her eyes closed upon coming to a halt, too terrified to open them. It was apparent that she had landed on something soft, and when she did muster the courage to open her eyes again, she found it was a large plushie of a white pony with a rainbow mane and both wings and a horn. As she sat up, she saw that several other scattered plushies depicting 3 ponies, respectively colored blue, pink, and purple, had also helped to cushion the impact. Little Wing tilted her head, seeing the cot on the other side of the room. How had she ended up here? Her gaze fell to her wings, and when she opened them, she could feel a strange sensation flowing through them. In fact, that sensation appeared to be flowing throughout her entire body. It felt powerful. A curious expression on her face, she gave her wings another flap, and once more found herself shooting off into the air. After a few moments of panicking and knocking over a thing or two, Little Wing finally figured out how to flap her wings in sync with one another, almost instinctively pulling up and coming to a gentle hover in the middle of the room. She then gave a happy squeal of delight. She was flying. She was actually flying. But how? Her wings seemed so small, and what was the power she felt? It hadn't been there when she went to sleep. Nevertheless, with a joyful giggle, Little Wing began circling the room as if it was some sort of racetrack, laughing to herself as she rapidly gained confidence with her newfound ability. The filly then stopped by the door, tilting her head as she examined the handle. Normally, she wouldn't be able to reach it, But now, with Flight on her side, that particular issue was now very much a non-issue. Moving gently forward, she pulled the handle down and let the door swing gently open. Excited at the whole world just begging her to explore it, the filly immediately took off down the hallway. All the other doors were shut, but she held little interest in going into them. Instead, her gaze fell upon the staircase, and with a sharp turn, she sped down it and looped around into the living room. It was there that Windy Whistles gave a shriek as the filly's sudden entrance scared the life out of her.
Gah! Oh, Little Wing?
Windy Whistles stated in shock. The foal froze up. Now she had done it. Oh, she was in trouble now. Then, Wendy's face morphed into a humongous grin.
Honey, our little girl is flying!
Before Little Wing could take any other action, Bo Hothoof burst in through the doorway using his wings as propulsion. He had to take in a gulp of air to compensate for the sudden action, but then shared his wife's grin.
So she is! It's about time. She should have done this already.
So she's a late bloomer. So what?
Wendy dismissed.
Oh, look at how masterfully she's navigating. Oh, she got out of her room and down here all by herself.
Little Wing was a little perplexed as to what was actually happening. Her mother gave a delighted squee, and then gently began to hover in the air so she was eye level with her daughter.
Oh, look at you. Getting used to your magical surges, are we?
Little Wing tilted her head. Magical surges? What was she going on about? Giggling to herself, Windy Whistles gently took Little Wing into her grasp and lowered herself back onto the floor.
Now, I would enjoy it while they last, honey. After it wears off, you'll have to learn flight all over again.
So it was a temporary thing, as Little Wing had just come to realize. It was a little disappointing to the filly. She'd never felt so good. She fidgeted in her mother's grasp, breaking free and taking to the air again. If it was temporary, she was going to take her mother's advice and enjoy it while it lasted. And so she went back to flying around in circles, each lap trying to beat her previous best time. All the while, her two parents watched from below, their eyes twinkling proudly.
Look at her go, Bo Hothoof stated. This is worth a trophy, surely.
Oh, this brings back memories,
Windy remarked.
Remember when Dashy went through all this?
We couldn't catch her,
Bo recalled with amusement.
At least she's content on flying in circles and not the other end of Equestria.
Then, on one of her laps, Little Wing swerved and dived on into the kitchen. For the first time, she was able to reach the high-up cupboards, and she was going to investigate them all.
No, not that one!
Bo Hothoof exclaimed as he prevented Little Wing from opening one cupboard that seemed to be filled with drinking glasses. But while he was distracted with that, Little Wing opened up the neighboring cupboard and quickly grabbed the first thing she saw out of it. As it turned out, it was a big brown jar with the word cookies written on it. Ha! Jackpot! Little Wing opened the jar and quickly munched the first cookie atop the pile. And boy, was it the best cookie she had ever had. Or the first, in the case of her new life.
Uh-oh, she's discovered cookies,
Bo remarked, slight dread tinting his amusement.
And so it begins.
Yes, give that here, you!
Windy scolded as she pried the cookie jar from her daughter. Little Wing gave a protesting whimper, wiggling her tiny hooves in the direction of the jar. Windy rolled her eyes but seemed to relent a little.
All right, one more. This is a special occasion after all.
Windy took a second cookie from the jar and passed it gently over to Little Wing. The small filly took the cookie gladly and happily began to nibble on it, intent to savor the treat for as long as she could. With her daughter content with her cookie, Windy took her out of the air and deposited the foal onto her back. She then passed the jar over to her husband.
Go find a hiding place for this. I'm going to take Little Wing to play outside for a while.
Yeah, ma'am.
Bo replied with a salute, dutifully taking the jar and moving off to carry out his orders and find the perfect hiding place. Well, at least until the jar was invariably discovered at some point in the future. While he was busy doing that, Windy Whistles took the still preoccupied filly and exited the house. She walked a little ways out into the front garden and then sat down while gently lowering Little Wing onto the cloud.
Oh, Windy!
A new female voice called out, causing Little Wing to ignore the cookie for a moment and look up, only then realizing that they were outside.
Violet Rain!
Windy greeted back to the other Pegasus with a wave. Violet Rain was a deep violet mare with both a dark blue mane and eyes, her cutie mark being of a rain cloud. Little Wing also had to note that there was a small filly flying erratically around just next to the mare.
No, I'd say little Misty Gust has started her surges too.
Misty Gust, as the filly was apparently named, was a small foal with a dark gray coat with a mane that was primarily a lighter gray with cyan highlights intermittently striking through it. Her eyes were a matching cyan, and, obviously, she had yet to gain a cutie mark.
I know. Barely a week old, and it's as if she's been in our lives forever.
Violet stated as Misty spotted the new ponies and immediately hid behind her mother. Not that Little Wing was much better, quickly planting herself beneath Windy Whistles for protection. Both mares chuckled, with Violet speaking up a moment later.
It appears they're both shy ones. Hey, we've barely been able to tear her away from her picture books.
Violet approached Windy Whistles and sat down just in front of her friend, the two foals continuing to shyly hide themselves away.
So, how are things at home?
Windy inquired.
They're going fine. Wild Ace has been working ever so hard at the factory now that I'm no longer working. I can imagine.
Windy Whistles responded.
My beau is starting again this week now that things have settled down. So she has settled in, right?
Windy nodded.
Yes, though there was a little trouble with our Dashie.
As their mothers continued to chatter, the two fillies steadily gained the courage to slowly creep away from their mothers and towards one another, fear being replaced with curiosity. Both observed the other for a few tense moments before Little Wing remembered she still had half a cookie in her hooves. Giving Misty a welcoming smile, Little Wing presented the cookie to the other filly. Misty Gust took it from Little Wing, seemingly not sure what to make of it, likely never having had solid food before. That didn't stop her from eventually depositing the cookie into her mouth, though, and her eyes lit up as she gleefully consumed the gifted treat. Seeing that she enjoyed it, Little Wing gave a welcoming babble to the other foal. Misty seemed to understand, nodding back with a little babble of her own. Both fillies were all smiles as they had a small conversation of their own in baby speak, even though neither truly understood the other. Before both of them channeled their giant influx of magic and took to the air in a friendly game of tag. It appeared that Little Wing had just made her first friend.